Good morning. Today is July 30th, 2026, and I haven't recorded in a while. So I wanted to start off by apologizing to my audience for not recording for a while. We had a litter of pups that had to be raised, and now 16 weeks old. My wife had knee surgery, so all these things caused me to not be able to record for quite some time. Today's topic is the Doberman uh, rescue project in Finland. This video came about as a result of a show I did with NWA Corso Joe and Vito Alu, a noted American Bulldog breeder. And in that video, we discussed the difference between rescuing a breed through crossbreeding versus creating a new breed, and what is appropriate in one case versus the other case. I came out strongly in favor of rescuing a breed, and I don't want to get rid of our heritage breeds. I feel they're worth saving. I feel that they're a living history. And if we constantly crossbreed and we create a bunch of mutts which are not fit for any specific purpose whatsoever. In some cases, people crossbreed like the golden doodle and other variations of the doodle, simply to cash in on the market trend because that particular cross makes them money. They're not trying to create a breed, they're just trying to create a cross, claiming it's hypoallergenic, although, for example, the Schnauzer is hypoallergenic, so why use the poodle? Or why not buy the poodle in the first place, as it is, as a pure breed? So there is a play for creating designer dogs to cash in on what's considered hot. This video is not about creating designer breeds. This video is not about bully mixes, which are very common to mix uh, pit bulls with mastiffs and call those game dogs. This video is not about that. Now, why would I be talking about Dobermans in a German Shepherd channel? Well, this is not a German Shepherd channel exclusively. We talk about genetics, which applies to all breeds, not German Shepherds alone. And so we are very focused on animal welfare, animal health, maintaining our animal to the highest possible ethical standards through hip x-rays, genetic testing. And I think breeders need to take ethics first approach in the animals they create and not breed sick animals. So if you have an animal with DCM1, which is a form of heart disease, then you have two carriers, don't breed them. But people breed them anyhow. They'll say, well, I'll just pet them out. What does that mean, you pet them out? You'll cause an owner heartbreak when their dog dies young due to heart disease. So that's not an acceptable solution just because you want to make money. So an ethics first approach is always what I feel all breeders should follow, regardless of the breed. And so that show brought about a topic of how to rescue a breed and what is the point at which breed rescue is required. If you recall an earlier video, I did a video called the Ancestor Loss Coefficient, and we talked about what's called the AVK and how that indicates when a breed's genetic diversity is so low that you can't find any more clears and the breed is genetically sick and you can't outcross anymore. There's nothing to outcross to. And so that show is tied to this show as well. I urge you to watch that video. But what really struck me and tugged at my heartstrings is that I had a phone call from a gentleman, Dimitri, whose last name shall not be mentioned. He lost a Doberman about a year ago and really, really wanted to buy a Doberman puppy and really wanted to have a dog he would love and cherish and just loves this breed. In talking to him, I told him, look, I can't help you. I don't breed Dobermans. I breed German Shepherds. Uh, how can I help you? He says, well, maybe you can advise me of what to look for. I says, okay, no problem. And so he tells me the story that he called 400 breeders over a year's time, 400, and couldn't find a single breeder which would guarantee long life expectancy or that the dog would be DCM clear. And I'm like, you called 400 breeders in the space of 1 year? He says, yes, I kept technical notes. I says, well, what kind of breeders did you call? Show breeders, working breeders? What did you call? He says, well, I called some breeders in Serbia. Serbia was part of former Yugoslavia, for those who don't know. I called breeders in Germany. I called breeders in the US. Very famous kennels with some very famous show dogs. I called working kennels. Nobody would guarantee me a long-lived Doberman. All of them said their Dobermans died around age 6, in some cases age 8, in a breed that is supposed to live until age 13. I said, that's a very sad state of affairs, that a dog which is supposed to live until age 13 only lives until 6 or 8 years of age. So I started doing some research, and I found that in Finland, there's a Doberman rescue project involving crossbreeding the Doberman to 4 other breeds. I'm going to take you through what I've read in that project and how the breed can be rescued. There are other breeds that can be rescued. For example, the Collie blindness and MDR1, which makes the dog resistant to anesthesia. And so, or other drugs that the dog might die on the operating table. Ignore that phone call in the back. And so we have some breeds which are not at a low AVK yet, like the German Shepherd, but it might get there in the next few years. And so some of the lessons we can learn in rescuing the Doberman and lessons we've learned in rescuing the Dalmatian can also be applied to other breeds. And so without further ado, let me share my screen and take you through what I've learned about this Finnish project. Bear with me as I share my screen. Everybody should be able to see this screen. So if closing the stud book caused the demise of the breed, can opening the stud book rescue the breed? So if we do nothing to save the Doberman, it'll be gone as a breed in the next 40 years due to DCM. It's so prevalent in this breed that something needs to be done now, or in the next 40 years, the Doberman breed will die because every dog will have heart disease. And in order to save it for future generations, we need to do something now. As I mentioned, there was a gentleman who called me. He said to me the following words: I wasn't looking for a champion. I was just looking for more time. DCM is stealing our Dobermans, and genetic diversity is the only defense. He called 400 breeders 1 year after losing his dog. 0 guaranteed a long life of their puppy that would become an adult. And so essentially, he couldn't find a breeder that would sell him a dog, which the breeder stood behind that dog's health. So the answer is, can we save the Doberman before it's too late? Not blind purity, but purposeful conservation breeding. Healthy, functional, and recognizably Dobermans. So the problem isn't just the disease, the problem is loss of genetic diversity. We're going to explain the AVK briefly here and how the COI can help. Why? Before we explain that, um, let me explain something. Let me stop sharing for a second. Um, so basically, the COI, the coefficient of inbreeding, not as measured by pedigree analysis, but as measured by embark, which measures long runs of homogeneity. A breed is said to have a high degree of homogeneity when it's highly inbred, and a breed is said to have heterozygous genes, or not like genes in the two allele pairs, has a certain degree of heterozygosity. The Doberman has reached a 40% COI, 40%. To put this into perspective, full brother, full sister mating, which I obviously discourage you to do, has a COI of 25%. Let me repeat that. A full brother, full sister mating has a COI of 25%. The Doberman, with what are seemingly unrelated dogs, has a COI of 40%. So essentially, every Doberman you find is a photocopy of every other Doberman. In other words, they're practically clones. Not that they are clones, but they're basically the same dog over and over and over, no matter which part of the world you go to, Germany, Serbia, um, the Czech Republic, or Romania. No matter which country you go to, the COI is between 40 and sometimes 50, as high as 55% in some cases. So you're saying, well, if I'm in a different country, I'm part of a different gene pool, and therefore the gene pool of country one, let's say Germany, should not be the gene pool of country B, just let's say the United States. How can dogs from two very different parts of the world have such a high COI, even though they're not genetically close, and they're miles and miles apart? So therefore there should be different gene pools and therefore a different degree of genetic health. The answer is that the Doberman, despite being geographically far apart in different parts of the world, has such a high COI no matter what country you're in. In other words, your AVK, if it's 80 to 95%, that breed is healthy. There's a lot of genetic diversity still left. 60 to 70%, your diversity is going down. Once you're below 60% AVK, you are in danger, and your breed has exhausted its gene pool, and therefore you need new allele pairs and you need new fresh alleles to recover the breed. If you can't recover them from your own breed, where do you get them? Well, you must get them from some other breed, because your breed has run out of genetic diversity. You can no longer outcross to a non-carrier. Essentially, everybody's a carrier, or very, very close to everyone is a carrier. But the bottom line is, no matter how you try to outcross within your own breed to keep the breed pure, in other words, breeding purebred Doberman to purebred Doberman, you can't find something to outcross to. You've exhausted your gene pool. Your AVK is below 60%. And AVK and COI have a direct relationship. As COI goes up, AVK goes down. So let's explore that a little further in this graph, okay? Shall we? So let's look at this chart, and you'll see a relationship of coefficient of inbreeding as a percentage versus ancestry loss coefficient as a percentage. In the upper left-hand quadrant, you have low MVK but high COI. This is the highest area of concern. This is what faces the Doberman now. Low genetic diversity and a high coefficient of inbreeding. So this scattering of dots is where we are now. In this quadrant, possibly low MVK, but this mating has a low COI. In other words, dogs are very outcrossed and therefore there's a lot of genetic diversity. In this quadrant, we have high AVK but a close mating raisy COI. So in this case, you can have a high COI, but as long as your AVK is low, is high, above 60%, in other words, 70% or above, you can do lines, but not inbreed so far as to create a problem for the gene pool at large. So on your yard, you can do line breeding without affecting the gene pool of the population as a whole. And over here, in the right-hand quadrant, we have high AVK and low COI. So here, you have both high degree of diversity and a low coefficient of inbreeding. This is the desired direction you want to go into, basically. That's what we're trying to accomplish. So, what is the AVK? The AVK is the number of unique ancestors divided by the total of possible ancestors multiplied by 100. So, when you get to a large number of ancestors, you get to a large number of generations. So, for example, if we're talking about 12 generations in dogs, we're talking, going back, to give an example of timeline, to reach 12 generations in dogs, that would be from 1989 to 2026. That's the time frame involved. By comparison, 12 generations in human beings will be 300 years. In other words, 1725 to 2026. So the revolution, which made the United States no longer a British colony, was the Declaration of Independence was signed 1775. So you would have to have lived in 1725, 50 years before we declared independence from England, and until 2026. That's what 12 generations of human beings is. So because the life expectancy of the dog is shorter than a human being, 12 generations, instead of taking 300 years, they take approximately 35 years. So in 35, 40 years, you could have 12 generations of dogs. So the formula is very simple. 2 to the power of n plus 1 minus 2, where n, lowercase n, is the number of generations, and u is the number of unique ancestors. So the AVK is u, the number of unique ancestors, divided by the denominator, 2 to the power of n plus 1 minus 2 times 100. So it's basically a simple fraction. So what do we getting at? So genetic COI, Embark is not using pedigree estimates. It's actually a different measurement. So the pedigree COI is calculated from recorded ancestors and assumed inheritance path. Accuracy depends on completeness of accuracy in pedigrees and how many generations are included. So in other words, if you have a 5-generation pedigree, your COI calculation is lower than if you count a 10-generation pedigree. The depth of the pedigree determines the degree of COI. Remember, line breeding and inbreeding is cumulative. So if the same ancestor is repeated 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, his influence is spread all over the whole pedigree. By comparison, Embark-based COI measures DNA from multiple runs of homozygosity, long chromosome segments where both copies are identical by descent. Why this matters? A dog can have a low COI on paper, but still have a genome-wide homozygosity because the breed population is already bottlenecked. In other words, because of the popular sire syndrome, certain stud dogs were used over and over and over, and that DNA spreads throughout many, many females. So only a small number of males can influence the breed. In effect, the gene pool is reduced to the 4 or 5 males, which sired a lot of litters. Instead of, you can have 1,000 dogs, but if they're all descended from the 5 or 6 same dogs, the gene pool is reduced to those 5 or 6 essentially, having an outsized influence despite the sheer volume of other dogs. So once genetic COI reaches 40%, it's above the expected 25% COI from a full sibling mating. That's significant. So we already spoke about the relationship of COI and AVK. So Did we see such a rescue attempt previously? Yes, we did. We saw it in Dalmatians. In 1973, the Dalmatian had a disease called hyper, I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing, hypergoose. I'm going to open up the URL because it's hypo. It's a disease in the kidneys. I'm going to open up the screen and share this screen. Hypocorasuria, HUU. Let me share this screen really quickly because it doesn't automatically switch screens. Bear with me, guys. So you should be seeing this screen. So this is from UC Davis, and this was published. And over here, I have quite a number of URLs in my PowerPoint. I'm going to put all of them in the reference of this video so you can read them one by yourself. But essentially, the Dalmatian, because of the spotting, somehow developed this disease, and the only way to fix it was to cross back to the pointer, which is where the Dalmatian originally comes from, and then that first generation cross was then crossed back to the Dalmatian for 5 generations after that. And so the dogs that came out of it were essentially pure Dalmatians because the pointer cross was a one-time event, but it introduced the right set of genes to fix this disease. So let me share the screen again. So the question is, if a single outcross with a single dog rescued the Dalmatian, why can't we do that for the Doberman? If we took only one dog to rescue the Dalmatian, one single pointer cross, the annual sanction, meaning the AKC authorized it, then if it was sanctioned, why not breed the Doberman, let's say, to the most similarly phenotypical example today would be the Beauceron, which is a breed, which was one of the foundation breeds used to create the Doberman, or let's say the Hungarian Vizsla, another breed that was used to create the Doberman. Why not do a single outcross outbreeding to a Vizsla, breed back to a Doberman, and consider the problem fixed? The issue is that in the case of the Dalmatian, it was a well-known disease, and one outbreeding was enough to solve the issue. It was not multiple diseases, and the COI was not that high. So you were attacking one specific disease, but the breed did not have such a high COI, no matter which dog you touch. And so in the case of the Doberman, you're not just trying to fix one disease, DCM1, you're also trying to fix a lower degree of genetic diversity. Your gene pool is too shallow, in other words. So the question is, if closed stud books created the bottleneck, can opening the stud book repair it? The answer is yes, but how to do it? So the Finnish club, the Finnish Kennel Club, in the Helsinki, approved by the Finnish government a Doberman Outcross Project in May of 2026. So this is recent. What's important is VDH, the German Kennel Club, since the Doberman is a German breed, allowed this project to go on. In other words, the problem is so bad that normally people discourage outbreeding to a foreign breed. They only stay pure and only stay within your own breed. But in this case, the problem of heart disease is so strong in this breed that the German Kennel Club that controls the breed, the VDH, allowed it. And so this is a sanctioned um, project, not an unsanctioned project. What do I mean by sanctioned versus unsanctioned? If a project is unsanctioned, a breeder in yard number one does, let's say, a Beauceron Doberman cross and sells those puppies as if they're purebred Dobermans with hung papers, in other words, false papers. And breeder number two in his yard sells a Vizsla cross and a Doberman mix with hung papers and so forth. So breeders individually do outbreeding and then pretend those dogs are pure and selling puppies which are really mixed. And this is done across enough clubs that these cross dogs enter the gene pool at large. That's an unsanctioned, because they're selling dogs which are not pure and registering them as pure on purpose and in secret, not in the open, meaning it's an unsanctioned breed modification. But sanctioned breed modification means these hybrid dogs, by the time they reach the fifth generation, can be registered as pure Dobermans, despite starting off as mixed. And you're not going to register an F1 cross, the immediate cross, but you will register the fifth generation cross, because at that point it's over 93% pure Doberman anyhow. And you will be able to register those puppies as pure Dobermans because you've been allowed to, and you're not fooling nobody. In other words, you're not hanging papers. Now, which breeds were allowed to be crossbred with the Doberman? They are the Hovabart, the Gordon Setter, the Laponian Herder, a Finnish breed, and the GSP, the German Short-Haired Pointer. Here's the URL for the Finnish Club actual webpage. I'm going to share this screen. Bear with me, guys, as I switch screens, because this software is not letting me switch instantly. Bear with me as I switch screens. You should all be able to see the screen right now. As you can see, the screen is in Finnish, not in English. So you click on the translate button, and it will translate this into English. This is from Finland. And you can go to this URL. It will be in the description of this video. And this is describing in Finnish the we're going to switch to English right here, and this is now translated into English. And so this is the rescue project from Finland, and this is the website of the organization running this crossbreeding project. I thought you should know the actual URL in case you want to look it up for yourself. So we're going to stop sharing for a second. And so the goal is to recreate from these four breeds. And why these four? Because they want the greatest chance to expand the gene pool. Now, the focus is not working temperament. The focus is heart disease, DCM1. So a question some of you may ask is, well, doesn't Embark identify DCM1? And if a dog is clear of DCM1 on Embark, then why do we need to crossbreed? You already know what dog has DCM1 based on the Embark results. Why bother? The answer is DCM1 is a tricky disease because it's polygenetic, not monogenetic. You may have a dog which tests clear on DCM1 on embark, and yet develops the disease past age 4 or past age 6 and still die of heart disease. So the dogs they choose have all been echocardiogrammed over and over and over throughout their life and have had a history of not only the parent dogs having the disease, but all 4 sets of grandparents not having the disease. So the longevity of the dogs, that's the ultimate proof that they licked it. In other words, not only is it clear on the embark panel for the disease, but long life of the parents and grandparents, that's the ultimate proof. The dog lives a long life, normal life. And that's why you can't simply rely on DCM1 because, as I said, we know a lot, but we don't know everything. So embark does not guarantee the result we're looking for. So these are the 4 breeds we're talking about. These are the crossbreed. I'm sure everybody recognizes the Gordon Setter. Everybody recognizes the German Shorthair Pointer. This is the Finnish breed that they're mentioning, and this is the Havonian, which is like a herding breed. And so you might ask yourself, well, why a pointer breed and a setter breed? These are 2 breeds without the working temperament of a Doberman. Well, the answer will be explained further below. First, let's explain the idea, and then we'll explain why they haven't published why they chose these 4 breeds, but we're going to try to explain that a little later in the video. And we're also going to explain why the original breeds, which were used to start the Doberman, were not used. But first, let's get the idea across. So notice in this chart, we have 4 separate lines. The first line is a Hovawart Doberman cross, this column. The other line is the Gordon Setter Doberman cross, that's this column. The third line is the Laponian Herder cross, and the fourth line is the German Shorthair Pointer cross. So these are 4 parallel rails running in parallel. So there's 4 F4 crosses, but they're running in parallel. 4 separate, independent crosses. They're not just putting all these breeds together as a mishmash. They're stabilizing the line and then crossing at the 4th stage. In other words, the first stage, let's take this one for example, the one which is the Hovawart with the Doberman. The first cross is 50% Doberman, 50% the other breed. In the second cross, F2, you've added a Doberman again. Here it is. You've added a Doberman again. And now you have 75% Doberman, 25% Outcross. Then the third set of puppies are born, and you again breeded the Doberman. Now you're at 87.5% Doberman, 12.5% Outcross. Then you reach the 4th generation. Now you're at 93.75% Doberman and 6.25% the Outcross. So because you've directly bred back to the Doberman right away, you're creating a dog that will phenotypically go back and look like the Doberman. So in the first cross, you're going to have puppies, some will look like the Doberman, some will look like the Outcross, whatever that happens to be from these 4 breeds. By the time you reach the second cross, it's 75% Doberman and 25% the Outcross. So you're going to have some throwbacks, which look like the other breed, but the breed will start looking a lot more like the Doberman. By the time you reach the F3 cross, it's 87.5% Doberman. It looks like a Doberman and acts like a Doberman. So the 3rd generation cross already is basically a Doberman. So almost completely pure. By the time you reach the 4th generation, it is a Doberman. At 93.75% DNA, for all intents and purposes, it acts like a Doberman, looks like a Doberman. It is a Doberman. So by the third generation, it's already pretty much a Doberman. So the F1 and F2 generations, it doesn't look like a Doberman. It looks like some kind of a mix of the two breeds, and it hasn't gelled yet. By the time you reach the F3 and F4 cross, it does look like a Doberman. So we're increasing the Doberman blood as we're going each time. Now, the question that naturally arises when you're preserving the breed, in other words, we're not creating a new breed, we're doing breed preservation, we're not creating a new breed. We're trying to keep the Doberman alive. We're not trying to create a new breed based on the Doberman. We want the Doberman. So the first question is, what problem are you trying to solve? What traits are non-negotiable? Meaning, if I create a crossbreed, what temperament characteristics are non-negotiable? For example, if I was to breed with the racing greyhound, they have tremendous, powerful hearts relative to body size because they're used for racing. They have very high prey drive, but would they act like a Doberman, or they would act like a greyhound? They would act like a greyhound, and that's not what you want because it's not a guardian breed; it's a racing breed. And so, temperament of the Doberman must be preserved, even though you're trying to solve heart disease. You're also trying to preserve the temperament and behavior of the Doberman. So you can't. So some things are non-negotiable. In other words, if I bred a breed which has very healthy hearts and does not have NDR, does not have this disease, but it changes the character of the breed after I do this cross, was it worth it? The answer is no, and therefore it's non-negotiable. So you want to keep certain traits as non-negotiable. What diseases do other donor breeds introduce? In other words, as I'm trying to get rid of a disease in this breed, I also don't want to introduce a disease from this breed. And how quickly can the original breed type be recovered? And most importantly, who controls acceptance back into the stud book? So back in 1973, when the Dalmatian Pointer Cross was made, the AKC allowed these crossbreed dogs to enter the stud book in the fifth generation by 1980, 7 years later. The breed purists cried foul. Oh, these are not pure Dalmatians. Foul, foul, foul. And they fought these dogs being in the registry as pure breeds from 1980 until 2005. And by 2005, they got their wish. They caused all these dogs to be unregistered. Well, guess what? The disease came back because the gene pool shrunk. Because you can no longer breed those dogs and register the puppies as purebreds because they were excluded from being registered as purebreds themselves. And at this point of time, from 1980 to 2005, that's 15 generations. So not only 5 generations, 15 generations. But the diehards still wanted those dogs excluded. So the question is, who controls acceptance into the stud book is very important because let's say we rescue the Doberman now with this crossbreeding project where we create 4 parallel rails. Rail 1, rail 2, rail 3, rail 4. We breed them independently until we reach the 4th generation, and then we cross them all together, right? Well, let's say 40 years from now, which is what happened with the Dalmatian, somebody decides, nah. All these dogs are not pure because they came from a mix. Even though that mix was 40 years ago, we want to unregister all those dogs. So we're expanding the gene pool now, but who's to say 40 years from now, people will want those dogs unregistered from the gene pool? So who controls acceptance into the stud book? So you're opening the stud book, but then you're reclosing it, right, to keep the breed pure. Well, what if somebody demands these dogs be unregistered? So that's a problem we face, right? So now let's reshare our screen. So Why not revisit the original breeds that were used in the creation of the breed? So what were those breeds? Well, Louis Doberman never wrote down the breeds he used. He was a tax collector, and he lived after the Franco-Prussian War, and it was a dangerous time to live. He also ran a local dog pound. He had a lot of breeds available to him, but he never wrote down the exact formula. It's actually after his death that two fanciers of the breed kept refining the breed and wrote down what they suspected were the original breeds. The original breed was the Black and Tan, the Manchester Terrier, the Rottweiler, the Beauceron, the Greyhound, and the Hungarian Vizsla. Those are the breeds which are pretty well documented as the original breeds. So if we were trying to restore the Doberman, why are we breeding to the Gordon Setter? Why are we not breeding to one of these original breeds, the Hungarian Vizsla or the Beauceron, which were part of the foundation of the breed? Why are we breeding to these completely unrelated breeds? Right? That's the question. We don't have the answer, but we have some thoughts we can share. So why not the Beauceron? The Beauceron has very similar silhouette, similar coat, natural guarding ability, natural working temperament. It's a French herding utility breed, similar size. Phenotypically, it's the closest to the Doberman that of all the breeds that are alive today. The French Beauceron is probably the closest to what a Doberman looks like. It looks, you can see the resemblance between the Doberman and the Beauceron. It's very similar looking visually. And so phenotypically, it's very similar. But why we're not using it in this recovery project? Well, phenotypic outward appearance isn't necessarily what population genetics optimized for. Possible reasons why it wasn't used: its own genetic disease profile, because you remember you're introducing the disease of the outcross breed into your breed. It has its own population bottlenecks. You're introducing unwanted recessive traits, and the genetic similarity is too close. Meaning, even though it was 120 years ago, because it was one of the foundation breeds, are you expanding the gene pool by going back to the very original blood that was starting the breed? No, you're not increasing the genetic gene pool because you're going back to one of the foundation breeds. And the overall health priorities are different in this breed versus the Doberman. Okay. Why not use why are we using the German Shepherd Pointer, the BSP, versus the Hungarian Vizsla, which is another foundation breed? What are the factors favoring the Vizsla? First of all, it's similar size and athleticism. It's a shorter, tighter coat, a sleek outline that is closer to the Doberman. It has a working heritage in emphasizing endurance and trainability. Generally good temperament. You can also argue that the Vizsla's head, neck, and overall silhouette are aesthetically closer to the Doberman than would be at the GSP. Well, the problem is that here are the following problems. Population genetics. The GSP may contribute more novel genetic diversity to the Doberman than the Vizsla. Genetic distance is more important than visual similarity in an outcross project. Health data. The project specifically emphasizes heart health. The GSP may have more favorable data for dilated cardiomyopathy, DCM, or a larger body of health information available for analysis. Population size. German Shepherd Pointers have a very large international breeding population, giving researchers more unrelated lines to choose from. Remember, you don't want to be then bottlenecked to the foundation dogs of that particular breed that you outcross to, because now you created a new set of popular sires, right? Which you don't want to be bottled down to that subset of dogs. You want to have a large selection, right? And working versatility. GSPs have been selected for stamina, breathability, and structural soundness in harding work. In other words, their hearts are bulletproof. Why not choose a Rottweiler? Also one of the foundation breeds. The Rottweiler is probably one of the most obvious questions to ask because it is widely regarded as one of the principal breeds that contribute to the Doberman development, even though the exact historical mix is not fully documented. If someone asks me why wasn't the on the short list, I would say it's a reasonable question. So why not? Well, it has a similar guarding instinct, similar confidence and courage, proven utility and protection heritage, similar trainability, comparable size and substance, and a historical relationship with the Doberman. So from a preservation standpoint, you could argue that it might require fewer generations to recover a classic Doberman behavior than a hunting breed like the German Shorthair Pointer. So why wasn't it chosen? Well, Rottweilers don't have the same prevalence of DCM as Dobermans, but they do have some DCM in them. And so you wouldn't want a breed which has any DCM. That's why you can't use the Rottweiler, because they too have some small amount of DCM. Not to the degree of the Doberman, but there is some. Shared ancestry, well, obvious. You want new alleles, not old alleles from one of the foundation breeds. Structure, they're heavier bone, broader headed, more compact, less refined, and they want to move away from the Doberman to become a heavier Mastiff type and still remain a very elegant dog. So here's some picture of the Doberman, 1897 to 1910. Look at these pictures very carefully. So notice that the early Dobermans from the late 19th, early 20th century have a broader skull, deeper muzzle, more substantial bone, and resemble a light Rottweiler compared to an elegant modern Doberman. It hasn't quite gelled yet. Now look at the picture of the same time period of the Rottweiler, 1900, 1925. So notice how much lighter they are than today's Rottweilers. And notice how they're not that different from a Doberman in terms of this time period. Now, they're not, that's not to say they were the same breed, but they're very different from today's Rottweiler. So, written by Philip Brunig. Who's Philip Brunig? If you remember, I said Louis Doberman died and didn't write down any of his breeding formulas. And his work after his death was continued by Philip Brunig. So Philip Brunig, I would argue, is more responsible for the Doberman than Louis Doberman himself, because he continued his work. Had he not continued his work, the Doberman would have never become the breed that it is today. So in 1939, he writes the following. This is not just anybody, this is Philip Brunig. Okay? He writes, it would be difficult to distinguish a coarse Doberman from a refined Rottweiler. That's not because they're the same breed, but because both were relatively close. So essentially, the person who continued the breed, he himself said if you put them side by side, it would be hard to tell them apart. And this was written in 1939. So this is not coming from just anybody, it's coming from the person who continued the breed after Louis Doberman died. So if you look at the earlier Rottweilers, here is a winner, Lord V. Tech. This is a dog from 1914. Notice it has a more working dog construction, not as heavy built. It has longer legs compared to modern Rottweilers. And so it's less exaggerated width. It has a more athletic build. And it has a working dog build, not a heavy show build as we see today. So look at the Doberman and Rottweiler from the earlier times. They're not that far apart as today's two breeds. So again, the Rottweiler would be potentially a very good example to go back to. But again, because it's one of the foundation breeds, you're not increasing your allelic frequency of new fresh blood. And that's why it wasn't chosen. Now, can a strategic backcross be applied to save other breeds? Well, this list of names, Dr. Sophie Liu, Dr. Robin Laurent, Holter Project, there's a website called Doberman Diversity Project. These are their email addresses. And if you wanted to buy, remember, every time you have an F1, F2 cross, those puppies are not purebred Dobermans, but they need homes. If you wanted to buy a crossbred puppy until the fourth generation, The crossbred puppies, F1, F2, F3, need a place to go. They're not registerable as pure breeds, but they need homes. So let me share the screen. Bear with me as I share the screen. So here's an American website doing a project very similar to the Finnish website from Finland called the Doberman Preservation Project.com. And notice what it says, puppies available. So you're welcome to go to this website to write an email to these people who are in my PowerPoint. And you can adopt a puppy from these crosses. What will their temperament be like? Well, it depends on the parent dogs. The closer they are to F1, the more variability you have. The closer they are to an F3, the more they're like pure Dobermans. But again, these are cute puppies and they need homes. And if you want to buy an intermediate puppy, which is not yet the finished result of the F4 cross, you can buy an F3 cross, an F2 cross. Here's a website you can get to get a puppy, which is a crossbreed, but you need the crossbreeds to be available to then reach your final end goal. So as a consequence, these are puppies that need homes. I would encourage you to go to that website. Let me reshare my screen. So if you're looking to share a puppy, buy a puppy that is crossbreed, until the breed is rescued, those puppies need homes, as I said. I encourage you to send emails to these people on the screen. I will put them in the description of this video, and I encourage you to give these puppies homes. So now, could the logic of the Doberman rescue be applied to rescuing another breed? Or should it be applied? Now, as I said, I believe in pure breed dogs. So I'm not one to believe in crossbreeding for its own sake. I'm not somebody who believes in randomly mixing dogs and calling that a breed. Remember, an F1 cross is not a breed. Just because you mix the poodle with a pointer does not make it a new breed. If you mix it back to a pointer, it's still not a new breed. In other words, mixing breeds all the time without any rhyme or reason does not create a new breed. It just creates a mix. And what I'm describing is not random mixing. I'm describing something that will be used to fix an existing breed, to preserve a breed or save a breed or save a genetic population, not to create a crossbreed, but to breed immediately back to the original breed in order to save it. So let's stop talking about Dobermans for a second and let's talk about a thought experiment, which is something I'm not doing for clarity purposes. I don't breed mutts. I breed pure breeds, but this is just a thought experiment for people to get educated. So what if you were to introduce the Dutch Shepherd with the working line German Shepherd? Now notice these two breeds are phenotypically similar. They're separate breeds, but they're both obviously herding dogs from, they were called Continental Shepherds back in the 19th century. And so there may be some hereditary influence from way, way back 120 years ago. Plus, the Dutch Shepherd was rescued from extinction, and one of the breeds used before World War I was the German Shepherd. And they then crossed it with the Malinois. And the Dutch Shepherd is very phenotypically similar to the German Shepherd. Let's say we wanted to rescue the German Shepherd because we've reached a very low AVK, right? And mixing the show line with the working line, with the American show line, with the Czech line, it doesn't produce enough genetic diversity. It's simply more of the same. Despite the fact that these are separate types within the breed, it's still the same breed. There's no breed called the DDR German Shepherd. There's just one breed, the German Shepherd. So what would you do? How would you do it? Well, you would do the same thing. You create a F1 cross, which is 50% German Shepherd, 50% Dutch Shepherd. Then you make an F2 cross. You cross it back to the German Shepherd. You would have a 75% German Shepherd, 25% Dutch Shepherd. By the time you have the F3 cross, you have 87.5% German Shepherd, 12.5% Dutch Shepherd. By the time you reach the F4 generation, which is the third back cross, you've reached 93.75% GSD and only 6.25% Dutch Shepherd. So basically, by the time you reach the F4 cross, you already have a pure German Shepherd for all intents and purposes. So the outcross introduces diversity, but then selection recovers the desired phenotype. In other words, by constantly breeding back to the German Shepherd, you recover the German Shepherd. You don't create a crossbreed that stays a crossbreed. You recover it back to the German Shepherd. Of course, the natural question people will ask is, well, isn't the Dutch Shepherd brindle and the German Shepherd is not? Let's talk about that. You would breed out brindle because it's a dominant trait. It's easy to breed out. Recessive is hard to breed out, but dominant is easy to breed out. So the key locus, KBR, represents brindle. KYKY means no brindle expression from the K locus. Selection rule. DNA tests and you only keep the KYKY offspring to the next generation. So by keeping only the KYKY copies, which you can do through embark, you've eliminated the brindle gene. By the time you reach the F4 or third back cross, the 93.75 German Shepherd, not only is it a German Shepherd in appearance, but you've deliberately unselected every other color expression but KYKY, meaning you will not have any brindle. So the same principle as conservation outcrossing. Introduce diversity, then breed back to restore genetic diversity. The brindle color being dominant would be easy to breed out. All right. So here's a working line German Shepherd. I'm sure all of you recognize it. Here is a working line Dutch Shepherd. Kind of looks like a brindle Malinois, but it's not. And then what would you do? Well, I have a video called The Color Genetics of the German Shepherd on my channel. I encourage you to look at it. Let's talk about brindle for a second for clarity purpose. KB, both uppercase, with other partner in the Punnett square, lowercase BBR is solid black. KB uppercase masks KB lowercase. So uppercase represents dominant, lowercase represents recessive. KBKY solid black. KBRKY is brindle. KBR is brindle. German Shepherds are a special case. Modern German Shepherds almost universally carry KYKY, which means the key locus is effectively off and the co-color is determined by the Agouti series, which gives you sable, black and tan, and bicolor, and recessive black. Now, is there such a thing as dominant black? Yeah, it's possible in the German Shepherd to have a dominant black, but in 99.9% of cases, black is recessive, meaning AA lowercase, meaning it takes a black parent mother and a black parent father to give you black. It's recessive. You need both sides to carry it. Or both sides must carry black to give you some black pups. Dominant black is very, very rare in German Shepherds. It's possible, but predominantly black is a recessive gene in German Shepherds, not dominant. So there is historical evidence that the breed once did carry brindle, but it's been bred out over time. So how would this work? Well, here's a Punnett square. The Dutch Shepherd is on top, the German Shepherd is on the bottom. The German Shepherd is KY, KY. The Dutch Shepherd is shown as KBR, KY. So the first part of the Punnett square is KY with KBR. You see that right here. This Punnett square is KY, KY. That's what we want. This with KY would give KBR, KY. We don't want that. That would be Brindle. And we want KY, KY. So the first cross, you would genetically test all the puppies and sell all the ones which are obviously Brindle, which is this combination, because here Brindle is dominant. Here, Brindle is recessive, but you would sell all them off. So you only keep, and then only the ones which carry KY you would bring back to a pure German Shepherd. You would deliberately unselect anything that carries Brindle or is Brindle. So the way it would work is the first cross is 50-50 GSD and Dutch Shepherd. The next cross is 75% GSD, 25% Dutch Shepherd, known as the red pie chart in the pie chart. The F3 cross is 87% GSD, 12.5% Dutch Shepherd. By the time you reach the F4 cross, it's 93.75% GSD, 6.25% Dutch Shepherd. And by the time you reach the F5 cross, it's 96.88% GSD, 3.125% Dutch Shepherd, meaning it's less than 1/16th of the total blood. So the Brindle alleles are eliminated every time you selected only KY, KY. This would have to be done this way with genetic testing, just to be sure you don't carry any fourth any Brindle. So somebody doing this would have to do genetic testing and or for hip x-rays and all the usual testing, but testing not to carry Brindle would definitely be a requirement, some of those to carry out this experiment. So I think I already covered this. We're showing how we eliminate the Brindle color as part of this project. So in conclusion, our heritage breeds are worth preserving their living history. If we keep mixing, we will lose our pure breeds. That's not what we're advocating for. Mutts are not inherently healthier, but we cannot not blindly breed for purity only. We're talking about purposeful conservation breeding, healthy, functional, and recognizable. So the real choice is not random mixing, but it's also not blind purity. Keep an eye on the AVK. When the AVK reaches below a certain threshold, you start introducing another breed and breed back to your breed to save the breed. Purposeful conservation breeding, healthy, functional, and recognizable. So I hope this little talk was helpful to you. I hope you found it instructive, and I welcome your comments. We've covered a lot. We've covered how the Doberman can be saved. We've covered how potentially the German Shepherd can be saved. And we've covered the logic of how it's done. We've covered why certain breeds were chosen to recover the Doberman, why some historical founder breeds were unchosen or not chosen. And we've covered that we must not follow blind purity for its own sake when we reach a low AVK. In other words, follow blind purity all the time until you reach the point where you no longer can. And that will preserve our breeds. I hope this was helpful. Have a great weekend.